Take your Bible, please, and turn to the book of Ruth, chapter 1. I believe everybody will at some point in his or her life need somebody to love them. Everybody. You will, I will. And there is a story about the purest of love of one person to another found in the book of Ruth. Now let me set the stage for you. Elimelech and his wife Naomi have left the land of Judah because there is a famine, and they've gone into the land of Moab. Now the Moabites were the enemy of Judah, but when you're hungry and you're starving, you don't have any choice, and so there they went. They took their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and those two sons had wives, Orpah and Ruth. And so they go into the land. In a period of time, Elimelech dies and leaves his wife a widow. So now Naomi is a widow. In time, her two sons die. So now we have three women, all are widows. We have Naomi and Orpah and Ruth. It's a very desperate situation because they're not even in their homeland. Their homeland is Judah, but they're in Moab. So there's a meeting of Naomi and the two girls, her daughter-in-laws. Let's see what happens in verse 8 of Ruth chapter 1. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. In other words, you've been two good daughters-in-law. You took care of my two sons. They're dead now. My husband is dead, your father-in-law. But you were very good daughters-in-law. And I can't expect you to stay here when I don't have any hopes myself of being married, nor of having more children because of my age. And she says, verse 9, The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Can you imagine that scene? And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. So Orpah and Ruth, look at their mother-in-law, and obviously loved her, and she loved them, and said, we're going to go with you. We love you, we're going with you. Verse 11, Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. This time she calls them daughters, not daughters-in-law, daughters. That relationship has become so close. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? In other words, at my age, I'm not going to have any more sons. You don't have any reason to stay. Verse 12, Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone against me. In other words, I don't know what God is doing. I've been faithful to the Lord. I don't know what he's doing. For me, it's a hopeless situation, but nevertheless, I'm an old woman. Even if I could get married at this elderly age, I'm not going to have any more sons. And even if I had two sons, even if I conceived tonight and had two sons, are you two girls going to wait until they're old enough to marry? I don't think so. And in verse 14, and they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy son-in-law, sister-in-law. So Orpah leaves. She says, You're right. You're right. There's no reason for me to stay. You don't have any more sons. There's no chance of being married. I'm a daughter-in-law. I need to go back to my people, and I need to go back to my gods. Maybe your God has turned against you, Naomi. That's what I'm reading into it. I certainly don't want him to turn against me. So you're right. Thank you for releasing me to go. I won't feel guilty about it. I love you. I'm gone. But then verse 16 says, And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left, speaking unto her. We sometimes have misconceptions about people that we think love us because of what they say, but their actions really reveal who they are. And I'm talking about good people. I'm not talking about bad people. Orpah was one of the good girls. She had been a faithful wife. She had been faithful daughter-in-law. I mean, after all, she had left Judah, gone into Moab with her mother-in-law and father-in-law and her husband. Been a good husband. Been a submissive daughter-in-law and a submissive wife. And here she is in a foreign land. She's willing to go with her mother-in-law into Judah and to be with her. So she's a good girl. Don't get the idea that Orpah is not a good girl. There are a lot of good people in your life. They may like you. They may want the very best for you. But they may not really love you as much as they love themselves. Did you hear me? They like you. They want the very best for you. But they may not really love you like they love themselves. Orpah obviously was one of these kind of people. I believe she really, really liked Naomi, and I think she loved her. I think there was an element of love. But it wasn't unconditional love. Because she saw, I've got to do what's best for me. I got to do that. Ruth, on the other hand, said, I love you. Naomi, I love you. You may be my mother-in-law, but you're really a mother to me. I'm going to be faithful to you. I'm going to be faithful to you, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to be with you. See, anybody can say something, but it's the actions that really count. Now, you know I love music. Obviously, I like Southern gospel music. I truly believe when we get to heaven, forget the choirs, forget the harps, forget the trumpets. I truly believe when we get to heaven, it's going to be 4 men singing harmony with a male piano player. Now, I'm convinced of that. That's got to be in 2nd Habakkuk somewhere or another. But I remember when James Blackwood of the Blackwood Brothers, they were all friends of mine. I had the privilege of singing with them at one time, and the Stamps Quartet and the Masters 5 and all of that. But the Blackwood Brothers had a bus driver, a really good bus driver. And Bundy could really, he could drive that bus. Couldn't sing a lick. Off key, thought himself to be a singer. But his favorite song, awful. It was awful to listen to it. was You Are My Sunshine. And I can't sing it like Bundy. I'm not going to do that bus driver for the Blackwood Brothers. But you know the song, don't you? I mean, at least you know the first verse, don't you? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Isn't that a happy song? Isn't that a happy song? Why, you could sing that to your wife on Valentine's Day. You could sing that to your girlfriend when you propose marriage. What a wonderful song. Until you get to the second verse. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. But I awoke, dear, I was mistaken. Please, and I hung my head and cried. I could hardly say that verse. Isn't that pitiful? The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms, but then I awoke, dear. I was mistaken, and I hung my head and cried. The first verse is what's said. The second verse is actually what happens. So don't sing the first verse. Or if you do, make sure whoever you're singing it to doesn't know there's a second verse. But isn't that kind of true in the relationships that we have? How many times have you as a pastor heard somebody say, now, Pastor, you come to our church, I'm always going to be behind you now. Yeah, they're behind you. They're one of the first ones to stick a knife in your back. I heard about a pastor that resigned his pulpit. He'd been there several years. And a little woman in a bonnet came up. Oh, Pastor, I just don't want you to go. I'm so sorry you're leaving. I just don't want you to go. And he said, now, Aunt Mandy, don't you cry over this. Don't you do that. I've got faith in the pulpit committee. You're going to get a pastor. The next pastor's going to be better than the one you got now. And she said, that's what they said the last time, but it didn't happen. Sometimes our words are not just good enough. So here we are. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, he's dead. Her son, Mahlon, is dead. Her son, Chilion, is dead. Now she's got two daughters-in-law, Naomi and Orpah. And Orpah has gone home to mama and gone back to the gods of her mama. That brings to mind levirate marriage. Now let me spell that for you because you may not be familiar with it. Levirate, L-E-V as in Valentine, I-R-A-T-E. Levirate marriage. The levirate law was this in Israel at that time. Here is a couple that's married. The man dies. He and his wife have had no children. Now, by levirate law, his brother is now required to marry her, impregnate her, and the children she bears will not be his children, but will be the children of that dead brother. Do you understand that? That's called levirate law. And the reason for that is so that he will have a legacy in the land and that she'll have a legal right to the property that should have been her dead husband. That's levirate marriage. That's where the dead man's brother is required to marry the dead brother's widow, his wife, to raise up children. Now, Marilyn, my wife, is so glad we don't have liberate marriage. She obviously feels like she got the pick of the litter and wouldn't have any particular inclination to have either one of those two brothers. But that was the law in those days. So here's you've got a problem. You've got a widow. She doesn't have any other sons. She had two sons who are now dead. So there is no brother to meet the obligation of providing children in either Mahlon's name or in Chilian's name by impregnating either Naomi or Orpah. That's what liberate marriage is. And that's a part of what's going on here. Because you see, a liberate marriage meant there is an obligation, but there is also an expectation. Do you see that? So when you look at this story in the book of Ruth, there is an obligation that I think fell in Naomi's thinking on her, because her husband is dead and her two sons are dead. But she felt the obligation was upon her for a liberate marriage, that somebody in the family line needs to marry and impregnate these two girls so they can have sons or daughters. But there is nobody. There is no male. Nobody in the family. So that's the expectation that Naomi is laboring under. Now, the expectation by liberate law is as a woman is watching her husband die. She's got to be looking across the room at his brother and thinking, that's my next husband. I don't have any children by this one that's dying. That's the man I'm going to marry next. So she had an expectation. So it not only provided a legacy for her dying husband and property rights, but it also meant she now had security for herself, because there was going to be a man required to take care of her because he was going to have to marry her. Do you see that? Do you understand that? So you had an obligation that Naomi was feeling, and then there was an expectation, according to the law, that both Orpah and Ruth were having an expectation that we could still have a secure life, except for the fact it's completely obvious there is no male to make this liberate law happen. And so I look at it and I think about this thing. Naomi had nothing. Now think about this a minute. I want you to think about this. Get it in your mind. Stop a minute. Naomi had nothing. They came to Moab because of a famine, so she's dead broke. Doesn't have anything. She's elderly. She's not going to have any more children. She's having to return back to her home because she doesn't have anything else she can do. But she's got two daughters-in-law that she feels some sort of responsibility for. One of those daughters-in-law heads back home to her own home, but not Ruth. Ruth is staying with Naomi even though Naomi is elderly and broke without anything. Let me ask you a question. How many people do you know that it doesn't matter if you're broke or sick, they're going to hang in there with you? Got any idea about that? I bet it'll surprise you. I don't know how many times over the years that I've been a pastor that I've heard people say to me, I really thought they would hang in there with me, but when the going got tough, they left. They bailed, just like Orpah did. Got out of Dodge. You know, it's one thing to have an acquaintance. It's one thing to like people. It's another thing to really, really, really love people. And it happens so often. Ruth loved her mother-in-law, Naomi. It didn't matter that Naomi was in a place that was not her home. Didn't matter that she was broke. Didn't matter that she was elderly. She loved her. She loved her. But I want to show you something that perhaps you've never seen that I think is a real blessing. In verse 16, Ruth says this, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will," underline will, "I will go. And where thou lodgest, I will lodge," underline that. "Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will," underline that, "I die. And there will," underline that, "I be buried." See how many times she's talking about the future? Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you die, I will die. Wherever you're buried, I will be buried. But notice something that slipped in here that maybe you never saw. In verse 16, "And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge." Now watch this. It's a little different. "Thy people shall be my people." He didn't say will be my people. She didn't say that. Didn't say thy people will be my people, and thy God will be my God. She said thy people, and if your version of the Bible is what it ought to be, and I think it probably is, do you see it says thy people shall be my people. The shall be is in italics. That means that the translators didn't find this in the original manuscripts, but they felt like it ought to be there to clarify it. Sometimes it does clarify it, and sometimes it doesn't. Instead of putting shall be, which I don't think it ought to be, that really ought to read thy people, my people, thy God, my God. Not shall be, not will be. Now watch it. Let me go back. "For whither thou goest, I will go." That's future. I'm going with you in the future. Wherever you go, tomorrow, next week, next month. "Where thou lodgest, I will lodge." I'll be right there. I'm in the future. But then, thy people, my people. In other words, she looked at Naomi, not talking about the future. She said, "Naomi, I don't think you understand. I don't consider myself to have another family. You are my family. I'm not like Orpah. You told her to go find her mama, and she went. Naomi, you are my mother." Didn't say in the future, thy people will be my people. Your people are my people right now. Thy God, my God. Not thy God will be my God. Naomi, I belong to God. I belong to you. Not something in the future. It's already decided in my life. And because that is decided, that's the reason I can promise you that wherever you go, I'm going. Wherever we lodge, when we die, I'll be right there. When I die, I'll be buried with you. Do you see the wonder of that? Here is somebody. Ruth had it in order. God first, Naomi second. Orpah had it different. Orpah had it different. Orpah had it, me first, Naomi second. Big difference. There are people who claim to love you, but when push comes to shove, they're going to take care of number one. Now, they may love you. They may not hurt you. They may not stab you in the back. They may be, to a degree, as helpful as they can. But it's really, when it gets down to the nub, it's all about them. That wasn't true with Ruth. And the reason it wasn't true is because she had already decided the God of Naomi is my God. That's a big difference. Now, the Moabites weren't even allowed to be welcomed under any condition into the land of Judah. So, how could it be? They're in the land of Moab with their pagan religion and all that. How is it that Ruth could so firmly, so completely trust in God, thy God, my God? I'll tell you, because she saw the difference that God made in Naomi's life. So I'm going to ask you a question. Is there anybody that you can look at that you can say, they know God because they have seen the reality of God in my life? Is there anybody like that in your life? Think about it. That's the only possible reason Ruth could be serving Jehovah God. It's because Jehovah God was the God of Naomi. Is there anybody in your life that you made a tremendous, significant difference in their lives because of your love and obedience to God Almighty? I mean, that is really something to think about. Now, there is something else that I see in this story, and then I'll be concluded. Something that Ruth did by her obedience speaks volumes. And as I was praying and thinking about this really came to me, it occurred to me. Ruth said to Naomi, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Wherever you lodge, I'm going to lodge. You know, when you die, that's what I'm going to, I want to be buried where you're buried. All of that. Now remember, if Naomi had had other sons, the security of Ruth for the future would have been established because of levirate marriage. Right? Because that other brother of her dead husband would have married her, and hopefully she would have had children by him, and he would have taken care of her. Now she's got an elderly mother-in-law who's broke, or else she wouldn't be leaving where she is to go back home. Maybe even sick because she's elderly. And she's making this commitment to her, which means she's got sense enough to know that her mother-in-law is not going to be able to help her one iota. Not a bit. So in actuality, she had to be doing what she was doing because it was God's will for her to do it. So she wasn't actually trusting Naomi, she was trusting God. Now let me say a couple of things and I'll be done. Don't ever trust a human being to do something they can't do when it's just as easy to trust God who can do. Do I need to say that again? Don't ever fall into the trap of trusting somebody to do something they can't do instead of trusting the God that can do. Did you get that? Now you need to get that. You need to understand that. You need to really get that into your mind. You really need to get that in your mind. But there is something else. I don't know if Ruth knew that God had said this. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But the Lord did say, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long on the land that the Lord hath given thee. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. I am convinced in my own mind that if Ruth, knowing this was the will of God for her to love Naomi, to make a commitment to Naomi and to love her. I am convinced if she had turned her back upon an impossible situation, gone home to her father and mother, who by that time may have become wealthy people, we don't know. I believe that her life would have ended up being a disappointment and a misery to her when she left the impossible for the probable. When what happened is the probable became impossible and the impossible became probable. Nothing like love. When people show their love and prove their love, not just to you, but to the God that you serve. She trusted the God of Naomi. And I believe with all my heart, God blessed them both bountifully, because God blessed Naomi. Naomi could have had a lot of money. She could have had a lot of sons. She could have done a lot of things. But obviously, Naomi was trusting God too. And since God could bless Ruth through Naomi, he blessed Naomi in the process. I hope you have a wonderful day today. God bless you. Trust and obey. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. God bless you now.